Our gospel reading this morning, Matthew 22, 1-14, is the last of several parables that Jesus speaks against the chief priests and elders in the temple. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call on those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, maltreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Weddings are fun, aren't they? I remember in Chicago, a couple in the church they had been married for 9 years actually by the justice of the peace, but they wanted a religious ceremony, so we had a religious ceremony. Except it wasn't at the church. In Chicago, there's the river and it connects to Lake Michigan, and so they rented a big old boat, and we had the wedding ceremony on the dock. And after that, we all piled into the boat where there was really good food and good music and everyone was in a good mood. So we went out on Lake Michigan and had a good time. And it got dark and we could see the skyline of the city with lights. It was all lit up and it was very beautiful. I'll always have a happy memory of that wedding. Now there are some weddings, though, I don't have as happy a memory of, and it's when, and this isn't always, but it's happened, it does happen. A parent of the bride or groom, and typically it's the bride, is overbearing, over-controlling, anxious, unhappy, and cannot be satisfied. And then it makes the happy couple anxious and makes the pastor annoyed. In the wedding rehearsal, we're not walking up the aisle at the right pace. You just can't do it right for these folks. And I hope none of you have ever been that folk. Don't let me know if you have. Well, I figured out that when the king walked into the wedding banquet of his son and identified that person who did not have the right clothes on and cast them out into the outer darkness, it had to be one of those parents. Well, we need to have the right clothes on in order to live in God's kingdom and come to God's party. If this were a workshop and we were asked what clothes would be appropriate for God's kingdom, and we could put paper up on the wall and everybody could go write something, what would you write? Would you write the clothes of hope that you need to put on? Would you write the clothes of forgiveness, the clothes of faith, the clothes of justice, the clothes of peace? What would you write up there? The clothes that you should be wearing to be in God's kingdom. Then, of course, we could have another sheet because sometimes we're sort of like that guy who didn't have the right clothes on. And sometimes we may feel that way too. And so, what are the clothes we should not be wearing? Maybe you feel like you're really not wearing the right clothes to be in God's kingdom. What would that be for you? Sometimes maybe we all feel that way. I don't know. Maybe clothes of guilt or something we're ashamed of or some secret part of our life that nobody knows about and we'd die if they found out. What might that be? So we need to pay attention to what kind of clothes we are wearing. Now, Jesus used a wedding banquet to describe the kingdom of God. But the wedding banquet is only one way that Jesus did talk about God's kingdom. Now, he's retired now, Presbyterian writer and pastor Eugene Peterson, who's been a writer to clergy for many years, he has an interesting take on Jesus' stories about the kingdom of God. He actually says that they're subversive, and here's what he means. Parables, these stories about the kingdom of God, sound absolutely ordinary. Casual stories about soil and seeds, meals and coins and sheep, bandits and victims, farmers and merchants. And they are all wholly secular. Only of his 40 or so parables recorded in the Gospels, only one has its setting in church, and only a couple mention the name God. So then he goes on to say, here's why that is subversive. As people heard Jesus tell these stories, they saw at once that they weren't about God. So it put them at ease in certain ways. It did not threaten their own sense of control and sovereignty over their own lives. They relaxed their defenses. They walked away perplexed, wondering what those stories meant. But the stories were lodged in their imaginations. And then, like a time bomb, they would explode in their unprotected hearts. An abyss opened up at their very feet. He was talking about God. They had been invaded. Well, certainly the parable that I just read about the wedding banquet is perplexing. When the chief priests realized that Jesus had invaded their hearts with stories that communicated severe criticism of them, like today's parable, they got so mad that they wanted to arrest Jesus. Well, a few years ago, another Presbyterian pastor, James Curry, wrote a book in which he tried to characterize Jesus' parables about the kingdom of God. And he came up with a parable of his own in order to do that characterizing. His book is entitled, "The Kingdom of God is Like Baseball." He says, more than any other sport, baseball, in my view, offers a perspective that resonates with the rhythms of life and can help us better understand the life of discipleship. Now, some of us think about baseball right now because we're in the postseason, and you Yankees fans have already had cause to celebrate, and now you're having cause to worry and gnash your teeth because they're not doing too well in the second round. Well, this metaphor for Jesus' kingdom parables reminded me of a baseball experience that I once had. It makes me think of the kingdom of God. Well, I was a second grader, and I graduated from the second grade. And in that summer, I was now old enough to sign up to play organized baseball. So I got on a team and began to practice with them. And I'd grown fast, and I was a little chubby, and so I wasn't a fast runner. And I borrowed an old first baseman's mitt from my uncle and brought it to practice. And so I ended up the team's first baseman. And had a number of happy years playing with that team. Well, that summer, we got to do something very special. We got to go to a St. Louis Cardinals game in St. Louis. It was on a Saturday. We piled in a bunch of cars and drove to St. Louis. And that day afternoon, they were playing the San Francisco Giants. I did have one disappointment, though. Stan Musial was a baseball hero for me, and he did not play that day. How dare he? But I did see Willie Mays hit a home run over the center field fence, so that somewhat made up for it. Well, I tell you what, entering that iconic baseball stadium for the first time was just so awesome. I imagine the experience being like entering the kingdom of God. I imagine my experience being like the experience of an ordinary citizen who's just going about their business, suddenly approached by an official-looking person and being invited to the wedding banquet of the king's son. What an amazing surprise. And imagine an ordinary old person for the very first time going into the king's banquet hall. It would just be awesome. You look around and you think, well, I should see heads of state and captains of industry here. But look, there's other ordinary people like me. I don't understand it, but it sure feels good to be invited and accepted. Makes me have to rethink my understanding of God's kingdom. You know, the rules are different. You are invited. You are acceptable. Not necessarily those who you might imagine. Now, the awesomeness is something that leads to joy. And joy is a great quality of living in God's kingdom. It's part of the clothes you put on in God's kingdom. Now, there was a great Yankee baseball player named Yogi Berra, very famous catcher, and he's a great example of joy. Well, you know, Berra's known for his sayings. You know, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. It ain't over till it's over, and that's probably the best one, in my opinion. A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. The future ain't what it used to be. Well, he had a relative who wrote a biography, and toward the end of that biography, Alan Berra reflected on what it was like in the Yankee clubhouse and on his uncle, his relative, Yogi's role in making that an exceptional clubhouse. You know, in professional sports, they're always talking about team leaders and what's the atmosphere in the clubhouse. Are they together, you know? Well, he says, you know, the Yankees were professional, but all the baseball players were professional. What was different about the Yankees is that in all situations, even when they were down, they were always eager to get out on that field and play. And it seemed to me that a lot of that started with Yogi. He always reflected that truth that says you play a game much better if you enjoy it. Outside the ballpark, he was business, but on the field and in the clubhouse, you could always sense that he was more than just business. You could feel his joy at being a ball player. And joy is a very special quality of God's kingdom. Now, many situations in the world today are manifestations of that outer darkness, where there already is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And on the field of our world, may we bring joy where we can. May we reach out and invite others to the wedding banquet, just as we have been invited. Amen.